ephemeral, though.
All right, welcome everyone. Forgot to grab the gavel, but we'll get started here. Thank you for coming to the joint work session, the City Council and the School Board for tonight, April 13th. I'm going to pass it over to the City Manager, but before I do, I just want to thank the School Board and School Department for coming here this evening and for this is the most beautiful day of the year, so it's painful sometimes to not be out in the community of which we are serving on days like when it's really beautiful to serve. So I appreciate everybody coming together and the collaborative tone that was set when I asked, when I was speaking with Chair Rappaport on, how could we have this conversation earlier? We've had a lot of conversations earlier, and it was her suggestion that we have this session before, obviously, the meeting that you have tomorrow. So while we might not come away with complete agreement on everything, we will have a better understanding of what you guys are going to be discussing tomorrow night, and any future conversations that we'll have, I think will be better for having this work session. So before I pass it on to the City Manager, I did want to give the chance of Chair to say anything if you want on this.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I first just want to thank everyone on the school board, the council, city staff, all of our school staff for the many hours of time that I know everybody's been putting in behind the scenes to get to the point where we're ready for this conversation tonight. I know that this is not an easy conversation. The situation that we are in this budget cycle right out of the gate, where we need about a 6% increase every year just to keep things the same. And obviously the guidance that we have and the need for our taxpayers and our community to have it not be 6% means that we're always looking for ways to cut costs. And then doing that in the budget that we submitted, and then after that having to deal with this exceptionally unusual $1.57 million assessment from school care on top of the 26% premium increase didn't put any of us in a great spot to do the budget. And there's just no way around those numbers other than having hard conversations. And I'm sure if we all had our way, we would not be in this position, but it was so much beyond our control. I do want to just sort of voice that, we did already submit a budget to the city manager that was down 4.5 full-time positions, and that's not including any of the other reductions that we're talking about tonight. That was already a difficult conversation for our school department to have and for our school board to have, and we did it because we felt like it was the responsible way to be as responsible as possible with our budget. And we did prioritize in that budget 2 positions for special education because we have made the determination as a district that we needed those strategic investments in order to really do what we all agree is the right thing for kids, which is to have more of them ultimately be able to stay in our district, and to hopefully over time reduce the need to place more of them out of district. So I guess I just want to sort of frame that up for this conversation tonight. It's going to be incredibly hard. We're no longer talking about just can we defer maintenance or just can we save on copy paper. We're talking about people. We're talking about really difficult choices for the year ahead for the schools. And we are doing our level best to make sure, and we certainly know everyone who works in the buildings is doing their level best to make sure that it will not negatively impact the instruction that kids receive. And we are not cutting teachers, and we are doing our best to make sure that everybody gets what they need. But these are not going to be easy changes, and we're going to reach a point really soon where we can't keep cutting without compromising the quality of education. So I just felt the need to voice that, and with that probably overly long speech, I can turn it back over to
That's great.
you,
No.
but I just want to put that out there and be upfront about it.
Sure, and that this is, we should probably have more of these. And I do think, and a credit to the school board and the council this year, it took maybe a more exogenic shock to bring us faster together, but it was our intention to meet more as two deliberative bodies, and we did do that, and then we met a lot more because of the increase in school care. But just want to again appreciate the collaborative aspect of meeting, for the city of Portsmouth, meeting like all of the residents, school department, everybody in the same boat here. So appreciate again that effort that's gone in and will continue to go in. So I think we're passing it to city manager, and then we're passing it right back. Is that what's happening? I could have probably waited.
That's
I
okay.
guess.
Sorry, I don't know.
Waited to see.
All is well. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, School Board Chair. Zach and Nathan and staff and I have had multiple conversations. They've been very fruitful conversations. All I want to say before I turn it to Zach is one of housekeeping. There are fewer microphones than people up here, so if you are speaking, grab the microphone closest to you, or Kevin will get mad at me. And so we don't want to have that. So with that, I will turn things over to Zach, and we will take you through the slides.
Great. Thank you to the council. Thank you for the board for being in attendance, and thank you for the staff behind me who have been a big part of this conversation and trying to respond to the moment that we're in. If we move to the next slide, here's a kind of breakdown of what I want to take you through. Just a little bit about kind of where we were, the situation we're in right now. What was the work that the school board did previously in the official proposal that they had submitted to you and to the city manager? What new reductions have we identified as a result of the school care situation? What is the impact that has across kind of our operation and staffing? And what does the path forward look like for us as we try to look at out on the horizon, how is this going to impact things, and what else do we need to do? So part one, the first one is how did we get here? And that story starts with the next slide, which was we, like all the departments, we had city management staff come and say, look, when you build the budget, what we want you to do is we want you to start from a situation where you look at what a continuing services budget would be. And so we began that process, looking at if we rolled everything over, we didn't touch anything, what would that be? And it was a 6.13% increase. And I think Councilor Tabor's talked about this over the years about run rate. And I think, generally speaking, one of the things we're going to, over the long term, going to have to deal with is that is about where our run rate is we're around 6% with the current makeup of our services, our personnel, the things that are expected from us in the community. But a really important caveat to that is even that was based on, the building of our budget was based on looking at the healthcare stabilization policy and using the 10-year rolling average. So even that 6.13% increase was based on the 10-year rolling average of a 7% increase in health insurance, as opposed to what we received from school care, which was a 26.2% increase. So I want to be transparent about that. We move to the next slide. So school board took what would have been a $71.2 million continuing services budget, ultimately went through a long process, made some very tough decisions, and came back with a proposal that was about $1.1 million under that continuing services budget. And if, again, this is utilizing the healthcare stabilization approach, about a 4.5% increase. This meant approximately a 4.5 FTE net reduction in staffing across the district, and the places we went to find those funds were across a variety of areas in addition to those FTE cuts. Move on. This is our process that you're probably familiar with, that we go through. Our budget development, of course, begins in October. We get into the teeth of it with the board in January and February, and ultimately voted in late February for the proposal that we sent on to you and the city manager. Next slide. So in terms of that February proposal, I think if you talk to the board, I think they felt like there were three kind of pillars that were connected to the themes of what they did. That despite the reductions, they felt like the framework, the prism through which we looked at things was being student-centered, was being contractually sound, making sure that despite the staffing reductions that we were honoring all of our contracts, and that we were also being fiscally responsible and effective stewards of the taxpayers' dollars. This next slide includes the reductions that were part of the school that initial proposal that came out in February. So these were those positions. Most of these, almost all of these roles were removed without layoff. Some through retirements, some through reassignment, and one position that we never were able to fill, which was part of the conversation we had last year, which was a middle school, high school curriculum person that was part of our strategic plan. We ended up deciding that we were going to defer that position going forward, and that we would return to it at a later point, because it is part of our strategic plan and strategic goals. It also includes, I just want to mention at the bottom of that list, OOD coordinator. That's a out-of-district special education coordinator. That was a person who appeared on our books as a half-time position, but was someone who was not housed in our district. That was really a contracted services arrangement with a person who was the primary point person for our out-of-district placements. So then things changed, and I know that you're aware of why that is, and just as a review for the public, we went through all of the things connected to school care. The assessment that came from school care, the conversation, an ongoing conversation with school care about that assessment, and the concern that there was a possibility that our staff was not going to have health insurance going forward. We greatly appreciate the decision of the council to ultimately, under protest, decide to pay for that assessment. It is not only does it mean that our folks are going to continue to receive services, it also meant that people didn't have to worry about whether or not they were going to receive services. So we are really thankful for that. And we know that on the heels of that, it was very reasonable for you to ask us to assist in any way that we could in offsetting those costs. So our response has been the work that we have been doing. We've been in consultation with city staff, a lot of conversation with the city manager and the deputy city manager for finance and administration around around what types of numbers we should be looking at, how can we get there, and what do we think we could actually accomplish in getting us as close to some of those numbers as we could. And I can now take you through what our proposals are in relation to this particular operating year, which is a total change of $418,000 from this existing FY26 operating year. Several different things in here. The first of those, I want to give a thank you to the Association of Portsmouth Teachers. We have, under our contracts with the APT, teachers have the ability to go out and take courses and be reimbursed for those courses. And we need to budget, I think it's up to a third of all members will take courses during a year. And then from that pool, people go, they take their course, they have the ability to take based on the contract, but they also can then return back later and say, well, are there additional funds that maybe the district could utilize for me to take a second or a third course as I grow in my profession? In this case, and the district has the ability to make this choice, but it was in conjunction with our partners with APT. We're not going to be doing second and third courses this time around. That will not be available. And I appreciate APT knowing that the positive impact your choice has made on their members, saying this is not something that we want to fight. We want to contribute as well. In addition, we have some projected savings this year, additional projected savings in elementary out-of-district placement tuition as we start to reconcile what things actually cost versus what we projected. The curriculum position that I mentioned before removed from the contract. As we have had some positive some changes in terms of the students that have been out of district, that also has reduced the amount of money we need to spend on contracted services. So if you're a kid who's at an out of district placement, maybe you're getting PT or OT on site, and we pay separately for those items. That has been reduced. We don't anticipate that we'll have to do all that. The city IT position that we pay a portion of, $35,000 on an annual basis, that has has not been filled to this point, so this represents a prorated reduction in our contributions to that. And then you have several others. You get smaller into smaller and smaller pieces, but you get a feel for what we did in 26. And as you move into 27, in the next slide, several different items in here. I'm going to come back to the first one in just a minute, but on the second line, we're going to reduce a clerical position that's going to come from a pool of clerical staff that are between the high school and Lister. We have someone at Lister who is leaving that role. What we will end up doing is reallocating some of our resources from clerical positions at the high school to cover the needs at Lister, and then to reallocate tasks and duties across those folks at PHS. We're still working through exactly who those folks are, so I'm sure I'll have some folks who are listening and are worried that I'm moving to Lister. We're still working through those things, but that is the plan. We have a central office clerical position that we are reducing as of the first week in June, so that will come out of central office. Again, we have projected savings based on what we see in trends and what we think our investment in the assistant director of people services is going to lead to for us. We've reduced a consulting support line for the school board, which had been utilized through our strategic planning process and then rolled into other consulting services for the school board. We've completely eliminated that line. We have some district software that we're shifting out of central office and is being picked up through a reallocation of work within IT. We will end up deferring some facilities work, and as unfortunately is typical, we'll be going back to Kenny and saying, make it happen with less, which is something that we've had to do over time, and then a reduction in a contingency line that's associated with my office. As we move on to the second page of FY27, outside legal services, we have had that budgeted at an amount that we've been coming under for the last few years. So we're going to not eliminate our full buffer, but eliminate a good chunk of it and reduce $15,000 off of that line. Brian, we have a reduction coming out of the contracted services for central office connected to e-finance. We're eliminating the enrichment. Enrichment is not, we had a citizen once who thought that was a student enrichment. That is money that we use for staff to do summer curriculum work. We'll be eliminating some of that summer curriculum work for staff. That's not something we like to do, but we'll try to use Title II when we can to offset some of those things. We have a cybersecurity line that we're going to be able to offset from a grant that the folks in IT have hustled to get from the New Hampshire Department of Education. We'll be making a variety of small reductions in athletics. Some offset that we've talked about with the Deputy City Manager of Finance in relation to the IT position, and then some fuels and repair and operational lines that are separate from the line that I mentioned before. This, and I'll go back. Let me go back to the first one. So we're also going to shift the assistant business administrator at the school level into an accounting slot within the finance department, and finance will end up picking up the dollar amount we know through the end of the calendar year, December 31st. At that time, we'll work with City Finance to have conversations with the new BA about what the future of that position looks like. And I think one of the things we're doing, in here in a couple of different positions, both here and then the central office clerical position we're eliminated, is we're trying to find efficiencies and synergies across school and city departments. So the clerical position is dealt with elements of our kind of personnel and recruiting process. So this is going to require us to lean more on city HR, also distribute some of those tasks across people in our offices. So those are the changes that we'll be bringing to the school board tomorrow night for conversation and consideration. My understanding is the plan now is for us to have a robust conversation and with the hopes that we'd be in a position that the board would be in a position to vote on changes so that they will have the opportunity to weigh on a new official recommendation to you in relation to school spending. If we move on to the kind of the bottom line, so in terms of these combined changes, so this is just the new stuff. This is not the work that we did in the first round of conversation with the board, where we were, again, about 1.1 under the continuing services budget. This is additional savings of approaching $1 million. And this is without program cuts. This is effectively without layoffs, healthcare coverage protected thanks to your actions. I know that in terms of thinking about the next slide, what this does is staffing and kind of what the staffing trend has been for us over the last several years, starting in FY22. What I want to make sure that what's clear about this set of statistics is this is connected to locally funded positions. So we're still working through and want to make sure we give you a full accounting of what is happening in terms of grant-funded positions. But I think we're almost done. I was doing a lot of work on this on Friday to put this together. I think what you're going to see is a further decrease in personnel from where we are once you layer on what's happening in terms of federal grants. A lot of those, we had several folks that were connected to COVID who are no longer working in the district. I think this number that decrease will continue to go down in terms of the number of folks who are actually on the ground working for us as we've gone through this process. I mentioned that because I know headcount has been a big kind of conversation over the last several years. And my concern is, I think this is the right thing to do in this moment, responding to a particular moment in time that we have to deal with in order to make sure our folks have health care. I think Lisa alluded to this. This doesn't go forever. This is not a bottomless well in terms of the reduction of the people who work in the school system. And my concern is that the outcomes, whether they are test scores or it's kids getting into college or it's experience, people's general experience in the schools, they're going to be a lagging indicator from this set of decisions we're making now and the set of decisions we made over the last couple of years. And I just want to be cognizant of that if we're 18 to 36 months from now and we start to see indicators that are reflective of a reduction in the level of service that we're providing in the school system, it might not be fully this, but this will play a role in us not being able to provide the same types of things that we're providing now. But I also think it is a responsible thing to do. I also want to just mention in terms of enrollment projections, I know that we have been, we've been in a conversation where we've talked about, decreasing enrollment, and so there should be a corresponding offset in headcount. Our new projections from the New England School Development Council, NESDEC, who does all of our enrollment work, basically is the next 10 years for us look like they're going to be flat at this point. And so we've come down to where we're leveling out if those projections are correct. And so we want to be thoughtful about that as we move ahead. In terms of what this means for our folks, the biggest part of this story is their healthcare is safe, thanks to you. Jobs are generally protected. We're making these cuts without, we will be net 6.5 positions down, but we're not in the middle of a conversation right now, and we're thankful for that, where we're having dialogue about large-scale layoff of teachers potentially. Right in the midst of a hiring season where they have every incentive to leave us and go someplace else where their employment is more secure. So we're really thankful for that and the help that the partnership we've had with the manager's office and our understanding of your interests. Programs remain intact at the moment. There's not a reduction of large-scale programs. Some of those programs will be, working on a finer margin, but we're not eliminating programs. And the last, I think it's really important for our folks, our board, our staff, and the community to feel, reflective of what the mayor was saying before. This is a genuine, interest in collaboration and making tough decisions with the board and the council together. In terms of the path forward, what happens, as we move ahead, the long-term challenge for us is going to be, how do we try to bend the cost curve? So if our run rate, even on a non-school year, a school care year, is, running at 6%, and, CPI is in the 3 and change, how are we responsible to taxpayers, continue to provide high level of service, and start to bend the cost curve as much as we can? I think some of that is just schools, and if you nationally, we tend to run higher than just regular CPI. But part of it is our workforce too, and that's been clear in the conversations we've had in relation to school care. So we did offer, I'll move on to the next slide. We did offer a buyout package kind of in crisis last year, not with a long ramp or runway to get people on to make strategic decisions about what we do with those positions as people left us. What the board is planning to do at their retreat, which is coming up at the beginning of May, one of the primary products that we anticipate coming out of the board is a multi-year retirement incentive package that we would roll out in the late spring of this year to staff, with the idea that then puts our staff in a position to have those conversations with family about where they think they are, to reach out to their financial planners, to think about whether or not they're in a position in the upcoming, they're a year out from being able to retire sooner than maybe they thought, to then also be in a spot where they can talk to the state and have more detailed conversations with the state retirement system, and then have a deadline for us in the fall where they come back to us and say, I'm willing to take that incentive, which then puts it on the front end of our budgeting process. So then we can make strategic decisions about what positions are we replacing, what positions are we not, how are we repurposing roles, and when are we just taking through attrition savings for the taxpayer. So that is one of the things that's coming up for the school board. And then just to recap, we've tried to do as a school department through the school board's leadership is try to respond directly to the request from all of you and the direction that we received from city staff. These numbers go beyond what we were asked for from city staff, and we've worked really diligently to try to get to those numbers. As we said, we reduced the budget between the 2 fiscal years by $983,000. We are now, from our peak FTE count in terms of locally funded FTEs, are down. We're approaching 15 FTEs, down from where we were in FY25. We still have protected in the second wave of decisions and reductions. We protected core programs, and we avoided additional teacher layoffs. And now we're working on trying to create a longer-term, sustainable multi-year strategy that will begin to try to, bend that cost curve. In the midst of all this, the thing, what drives us is what's the mission and vision for our school district. This is all, you folks have seen this before. This is stuff that we developed through our conversations with the community. Our Porch River graduate, the things we want students to be able to, the traits we want students to be able to have as they walk across the stage to receive their diploma. And then in the next slide, the way in which we're trying to do that is through our 5-year strategic plan, where we're focusing on the 3 pillars of our regulation aligned curriculum, building educator capacity, and student safety in 2 ways, both well-being and belonging. So where this leaves us, where we feel this could leave us on the heels of the board taking action, and maybe making some adjustments, is that we feel like as a department we've acted both responsibly and decisively in a short period of time to answer the call. We feel like we've made things that are real cuts but are measurable. We feel like we've protected students the best we can. We're continuing to eye moving towards a more sustainable model, and we're excited about trying to do that together with the council as we move ahead. The one last note that I want to make, though, is that some of these reductions, I term as not structural. We have some things where we are covering things for a year to rise to the moment of a year of crisis. Not all of these reductions are things that will roll into the next fiscal year. So that's going to be a challenge for the board, and just something that we wanted to make sure that the council was aware of. So with that, happy to take any questions from folks, and I have folks with us from the schools who might be able to answer in more detail than I.
Dr. McLaughlin, I'll open it up to, I guess before I do, as folks are thinking about raising their hand, we'll try to go through, if there are questions of the school board, happy to entertain those as well. Appreciate the thought and the consideration that went into this. It's thorough and it's quick, and I know that it's not all of it is structural, but there is some in here that is structural. I want to thank you for committing to the longer term, more thoughtful plan around reductions or early retirements. They might not end up in reductions, but I think that given that there's a large cohort of teachers that is approaching retirement, to be thoughtful about having them not all leave Portsmouth at once, is also a benefit to the fact that there could be some reductions in cost savings. I think what was noted in, so I don't know if, what was noted in just this healthcare conversation over the last 6 weeks, 3 months, just how big of a concern, obviously healthcare is a concern to all of us, but whether or not you're going to take a retirement, and if you're not, yet bridged to healthcare from a retirement standpoint, I think we would love to have collaboration as those issues are discussed, and what those retirements could look like, because we certainly want to make sure, number one, our kids are educated to the highest standards, and I think having a plan is certainly better than not having a plan. And then finally, before opening it up to questions, you guys feel it just as much as we feel it, but I can share, just in having conversations with other mayors or other folks around the state, the concern when it comes to, now we're in an inflationary period, or we're back to an inflationary period. Looking at the rolling averages, and when we bake in a 3% CPI on top of everything else, that is a very difficult thing for every community. And so it's not Portsmouth in a vacuum. It's across the state, across the region and country. I believe it's incredibly important, and I know this is shared in the conversations that I've had with all of you, that efficiency in terms of how we use the money is as important, especially as we lead the state in so many ways. It's important that we also lead the state in terms of being a good steward of taxpayer dollars, to make sure that every dollar that we're getting the most out. That's not to say that we are asking everybody to simply do more, because that's a, as you say, will be a lagging indicator when people get burned out and leave the district, but to make sure that we are focusing on that as an equal part of the stool, because that's how people judge us outside of the parent-teacher conferences that I get to now be a part of. It's an important part. So just wanted to thank you. Come back to that. A lot of work went into this that made it on the paper. A lot of work that just goes into this as a part of it. I know that you guys have a meeting tomorrow, so appreciate you guys filling us in and having the 2 nicest days so far in Portsmouth spent inside this really hot room right now. But I'll open it up to questions.
I have a question. I know we have a health stabilization fund. Can you tell me, or tell us, how much of that is going to go toward helping the school care crisis?
And so, Nathan, it might be helpful to give a little background in terms of where we are with the health stabilization, and then, as a go forward, what we're looking to.
So, thank you. So the Health Stabilization Fund has existed for a number of years. It carried a fund balance at the end of fiscal 25, June 30th of 2025, of roughly $7 million. That reserve covers both the school and the municipal government side of the city. It has been built over a number of years. We budget on an annual basis for generally a rolling 10-year average of rate change, both with our school coverage that we obtain right now through School Care with Cigna, and through the municipal coverage which we have through Health Trust with Anthem. And each year, depending on the actual elections, who is employed, what vacancies we have, whether they were single, two-person, or family, et cetera, the reserve fund takes the flat budgeted amount and pays all the bills, and then if ultimately the actuals are higher than what we had budgeted, it's the reserve that kicks in the difference. And if in limited cases we have actuals that are lower than what we had budgeted and added to the reserve, then the reserve holds on to that to help for the future years. We have generally a policy or a principle that is that we don't want to use more than 25% of the corpus of that reserve in any given cycle. Right now, our estimation is that we will end this fiscal cycle 26 drawing down about $1.5 million. So our actuals will be higher than what we budgeted to put in. And remember, even that, as I say, it doesn't sound great, but we don't budget based on, we haven't for years budgeted based on what we think we might spend. We have budgeted based upon the 10-year rolling average of the rate change, which has had generally a successful run of smoothing the budgetary impact. And so in this case, as rates have started to climb, the 10-year takes a little while to respond. The 10-year rolling average takes a while to respond. We anticipate that our actuals will be about 1.5 million higher than what we budgeted this year. And roughly 25% of the 7 million corpus of the fund is 1.75 million. So assuming that we'll use 1.5, we anticipate there could be up to 250,000 of that reserve that we could draw upon under our policy to help with the costs related to the school care assessment. How's that?
So does that mean we can take 250,000 off of the 1.57
you'll be able
million
to
that
use-
we had to pay?
Yeah, you'll use 250 of that to fund the 1.57. Yep.
Other questions? Andrew or Councilor Bagley?
Thank you, Your Honor. Nathan, so at the start of the last fiscal year, we had 7.5 million roughly in the reserves,
7. Yep.
or 7,
Yes, sir.
and we anticipate we will use up until July 1.5 million,
Correct.
which leaves 5.5 million at the start of the budget we're talking about tonight. And of that 5.5 million, using rough numbers, about 250,000 will be towards school employees. Do I understand that correctly?
Towards the school care assessment.
Towards the school care assessment.
Potentially, yes.
Okay, and I guess I have thank you. And a second question, I think probably for Zach is, tomorrow you're presenting the school budget at the school board meeting?
These revisions, sorry, they've adopted their school budget, and it's come back.
So in February, we finalized our proposal to the city in February. So we will be having a conversation about what I just shared with you tomorrow for the board to come to whatever their official updated recommendation would be to the council.
And I guess the follow-up to that then, because when that budget was initially posted, the school care thing was unresolved. So does that budget have the 1.57 million minus the 250,000 in it, or does that have to be added still?
So I'll let, you want to start and I'll.
Well, I guess.
So I think the conversations we've been having with city staff is that the goals for us to contribute to try to get to where we could help offset some of the amount was not in that version, $1.3 million, or it was, can we get to somewhere between $800,000 and $900,000? And so we're at $982,000, to try to do as much as we possibly can to get as far as we could, knowing that there was, that in our conversations, the expectation was not that we were going to deliver on 1.3.
I guess a question for Nathan is, where does the rest of the money come from then?
Sure, so I guess I don't want to steal, I don't want to confuse the great work and presentation that I think was just done. Part of what I want to clarify, though, is when the superintendent talked about FY26 reductions or cuts, in fact, that's a budget, and they won't be cutting the budget. What they're doing is identifying in FY26, the current fiscal year, things that they had budgeted to spend money for and won't, so that those dollars can instead be available to help pay the school care assessment bill. So his $418,000 and change would go along with the potentially $250,000 from the reserve to help pay the school care assessment. The city has been working at the same time, and collectively with the school department's $418,000, we are estimating right now, we've identified upwards of $1 million, not counting the $250,000 from the reserve, of savings in FY26. Items that had been budgeted that for one reason or another aren't needed, won't be needed. I could give you an example and say in the area of welfare direct assistance, the budget had been bumped up in FY26 because there was a great expectation there would be a far greater surge of need than they've experienced this year. And so we'll close the year with a significant savings, if you will, budget that wasn't spent for that purpose. That would otherwise fall to the bottom line, to the fund balance. We can use those dollars of savings to help cover the school care assessment cost. There were provisions, debt service provisions, that we had in the FY26 budget for new bonding, and ultimately our new bonding back in the beginning of in June of last year led to debt service payments this year. That stuff all happens after the budget was established and voted, and so we have some dollars in debt service that don't have we don't have a mechanism to spend those, and those will fall to the bottom line. And then of course you've got upwards of 20 departments and divisions who reasonably can avoid spending the last $5 or $6 or $8 or $10,000 of their supplies and equipment and things that they might otherwise have done to add to the savings that we can drive towards paying for the school care assessment. I think that we walked away, staff walked away clearly from the night that the council dealt with the school care assessment and this conversation in this room with an understanding that we should take all steps to find a way to make that payment without a supplemental appropriation and calling on the taxpayers to fund anything additional for that. Right now, it's clear to us that with the work the school department has done and the savings that we've been able to identify, that we are well on our way to addressing that, so that there won't be a need for a supplemental, but that with our with some decision making and some thrift, we will avoid spending dollars this year, and those savings can help cover that assessment cost. The other portion of what I watched the superintendent present are real reductions proposed for the FY27 budget that we will yet consider, you will consider. So we're all in that same mode, but we certainly appreciate that, because part of that was not in anticipation of the school paying or adding to the budget the $1.57 million for the school care assessment, but adding sufficient to their budget to anticipate the 26.2% rate increase. Not the 10-year rolling average, which would only have been 7% under our policy, which is what's in their initial draft, but the full impact of 26.2% against their rates. So all of this is to help bring their budget further down, recognizing the increase of almost $2 million additional for health insurance costs next year, while we continue to work on the whole city budget. So the city side is also recognizing 11.4% in increases in health. So across the board, we have a health challenge that I mentioned to you back in January, and this goes a long way to help toward helping to reduce that.
Andrew, did that answer your question?
I guess The 26% increase in school care, is that inclusive or not inclusive of the 1.57 million?
Not inclusive.
So what happens next year? Are we going to see a dramatic? Because it seems like we're hiding a large percentage increase in healthcare, doing it this way.
When you say hiding, what do you mean? I guess like we're paying for it.
Right. Well, if the healthcare cost $1 last year, let's say,
Yeah.
and we're saying it's costing $1.26 this year,
Yeah.
what is the real number that it's costing us if you add in the assessment? Because the assessment is
1.39
purely
on the school side, $1.39.
so, but in percentage terms.
39% increase, so 26% plus the $1.57 million equates to a 39% increase in healthcare costs for the teachers in FY '27.
And I think that's the number we should use then, instead of this 26% number.
So in terms of, I think it's worthwhile to have a broader conversation around what we are putting into the health stabilization. One thing that did come out of the health stabilization conversation is that because we had not added teachers into that, we were paying less into the healthcare stabilization, or the school department was paying less into that. I think that that's a good conversation to have. In terms of the 26% increase being separated out by the 1.5% increase, we can certainly have, those conversations as well. The 1.57 million was what we asked the school board to look for monies in FY '26, as well as we were going to look for monies in FY '26 to cover that, so that when school care was, I guess threatening is a legal term, to end coverage on May 1st, that we had a plausible way of paying for that without going back to the taxpayers in this budget cycle and asking for that additional money. So that's, I guess, why we're focusing on the $1.57 million and not the budgeted increase of 26%, because that was known as a part of the original budget that came back in that was adopted in February, that the school board has already adopted. That did include the 26% increase. I don't,
No.
That's what
This
I,
one.
that's gonna be my question.
This one will.
This one
Okay.
does adopt it. I feel like we're convoluting the two budgets. We
I
have
guess I'm just confused why we're changing it to 26 and not the actual number.
I will go to Counselor Cook, and then maybe there'll be more clarity.
Thank you, Gunnar, and thank you for the presentation and all the hard work that went into finding these cuts. I know this was not easy. So I have a question about the stability of the health care stabilization fund in the long run. So what I'm hearing is that this year we are altering the budget to accommodate the 26.2% increase, plus the 1.57 million is coming out of these cuts we're making as well. So we're accommodating these changes. And I'm making an assumption that on the city side, we're going to be budgeting for the full 11.4% increase in our actual budget. That gets us to funds we need to just pay health insurance, but it does not increase the amount of money in the stabilization fund, which we've been drawing down. So logically, we would need to over budget to increase the stabilization fund up to a level that could sustain us for a longer period of time. Clearly, this year is not the year to do that, but what is the thinking in the long run about how we improve the financial situation of the stabilization fund? Because 5.5 million is not a lot to be sitting in there.
That's a great question, and I appreciate that. I want to go back because I think some more information will be helpful. Right now, our projection is that the 26.2%, okay, let me go back. I'll come back to that. I want to make sure folks understand, setting aside angst and frustration with the school care scenario, the 1.57 million is a one-time fee. It certainly may not be the only time the school care has to assess its members, given their organizational structure and their business model. But right now, for us, it's not a change in rates, it's a one-time fee. So we're looking to save dollars to find savings so that we can pay that bill. It does not accrue to the base, if you will. It's not part of the ongoing growth. The 26.2, whatever amount that represents on your health insurance as an individual or ours as a city, that's not going away. It's highly unlikely that we'll see rates fall in the near term, right? Their rates will climb, and they will climb from the level that 26.2 took us to. So that's just to clarify that the 1.57, you can talk about it like it's part of the rates, but it's really a separate invoice that we're looking at right now. So having set that aside, go back to even as we budget for the 26.2, that doesn't cover potentially the full cost of health insurance next year. That is setting aside the 10-year rolling average, budgeting for the full rate change, but it is I guess I would say from my perspective, it is the first year of setting aside the 10-year rolling average in order to get to a point where we catch up so that we are budgeting more closely to actuals on an ongoing basis. I believe, looking back, that one of the biggest challenges to the stabilization reserve has been that it was purely a 10-year rolling average of rate change and never reflected the changing headcount across the city, school as well. And so if your population was changing, the budget needed to have some adjustment to represent the fact that instead of 100 lives, there were 105 lives, et cetera. So we have naturally fallen behind, and the smoothing has been successful, but it's exacerbated by significant swings in the rates. So setting aside the 10-year rolling average and using a full 26.2 and 11.4 on the city side to drive this year's budget is significant. It's significant dollars. Right now it's representing almost 2.25% budget impact increase for the whole city across the board. The whole budget will go up 2.25% just for health insurance. Better than I had thought when we'd done projections. But if we were going to budget for the actual, it would be measurably more. I think we can stagger that and experience some of that additional impact in the next couple of years. We don't want to totally decimate and eliminate your reserve. You want the reserve to live so that we can go back to having this smoothing mechanism work well. There is evidence in the files that suggests that in years past, some years back, there have been recalibration where at some point they simply said, look, we got to catch up with actuals, we're falling behind. So I would suggest that this is like a recalibration, but I would do it over multiple years instead of one, because it's enough to jump 26.2 and 11.4 in this cycle and then still bring a reasonable budget forward for the city. So, but I think that inside of the next couple of cycles, you can get to a point where that is a more comfortable or a more stabilization reserve, and it will continue to serve its purpose into the future.
And I can't speak for the board, but I think this is a running conversation we've had for several years about how we're going to catch up. And I think, I think it's very reasonable for us to structure something that looks at a multi-year, pathway to rebuilding that stabilization fund. And if that means, there's offsets in what we're going to do and other things, I think that's just the reality of what we need to do.
I would just say one more thing. As a matter of practice and policy now, we, on both sides, we add to the health insurance budget anytime there's an increase in staffing that would drive additional coverages, additional individuals being covered. But at least for my part, we're not reducing. So if you happen to reduce 4.5 people and they all have medical to go with, we're not going to take anything out of health insurance because we're trying to catch up. So that is just one step in moving in the direction of let's recalibrate and get to a point where this is more stable for the future.
Well, and you'd expect that based on, us being down net 6.5 people,
That'll help.
That'll help. That'll be a step. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Morrow?
I'd just like to start by saying thank you to all the staff and the school board for looking and doing that hard work to take some cuts. One for the current year so that we can try to cover the assessment. And I guess my questions are around our fiscal year 27 budgeted. I just want to make sure I understand what's being said. So we are going to cover the full 11 whatever percent on the governmental side for Health Trust and the 26.2% on the school care side in that year, but then to stabilize it, we might look at it differently for the following year. Is that what? Because do we, in the healthcare stabilization fund, do we have a policy that says a minimum, like, I know it's not more than 25%, but is there a minimum balance that we can't go below?
No, as I understand, and I want to clarify that this was launched, the leave at termination stabilization was launched first, maybe in 1999 or 2000. This health stabilization took life in 2001, 2002. And it's in the budget book every year. It's written up there under our financial policies so that the details are there to work with. But no, to my knowledge, there's nothing that establishes what a minimum amount should be. I think that was the goal of the 25% limitation. And again, this is our policy, so you can waive it as a part of the proposed budget. We'll make note in the budget message that we seek in this budget presentation to waive the 10-year rolling average and instead use the actual year's rate change because we want to be fully transparent that we're waiving our own rule. We're changing that. And so if, for instance, somebody's asking if we wanted to change the 25% and waive that, if we wanted to take all of that money and spend it, that's certainly a prerogative as a council. But right now the goal would be to try to manage this over multiple years.
Councilor Tabor on the phone or on the Zoom?
Thanks, Mayor. Reflecting on what Councilor Bagley was saying, help me out if I've got this correct. We've got a 39% increase, but that really includes the May assessment that we'll pay in this fiscal year and the 26.2% rate increase next year. So if we took a May to July period, May to July versus May to July of the previous year, it's a 39% increase, but we're doing it in 2 bites. We're doing the assessment in the FY26 budget and the rate increase next year. Have I got that right?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Okay, so my concern is, are we able to fully offset the 1.57 million in this year? And it sounds like we are from what I'm hearing, because if we're not, then we draw down our fund balance, and that would catch up to us at the end of the next fiscal year, when we typically take some of our fund balance, 2-3 million or so, that we have in surplus and apply it to reducing taxes. So will we be able to fully offset the 1.57 million within the budget parameters that we voted for FY26, or are we going to take away some of our future ability to use fund balance at the end of the fiscal year to offset property tax?
If I may, Councilor, excellent question, and I would tell you that those are all the shells on the table right now. As we move to balance, we have measurable revenue excess this year, which will contribute to the unassigned fund balance. This $1.57 million, if you take out 250,000 of it, that could come from the reserve, and the remainder comes out of what would have been fund balance this year, or what would have been spent by departments, because we're going to ask them to hold back on some of those payments, some of that spending. That would have fallen to the fund balance, and so we are working to balance how much we can do in spending against the 1.57 and how that will impact the end of year fund balance. Right now, the revenues help, and we're working to be as creative as we can to find other ways that we could fund this. In my last calculation of numbers, there was still a couple of $100,000 between what the 1.57 and what I think we've got identified this year. One question would be, do you take that out of the fund balance? I mean, do you do that this year? Do you push that off and make it a part of next year's budget, or do you push it off to next year and know that you'll have to cover that out of end-of-year surplus the following year to make that payment. But one way or the other, we're looking to do the 1.57 without a budget impact, quote unquote, doing it out of the appropriated dollars. And we are definitely mindful that we do not want to cannibalize wholly the 13.65% of fund balance metric that we have held on to for a number of years. We would very much like to retain that. That has a lot to do with our bond rating and our successful financial policy work that we've done for so many years. Did I answer the question?
Silence is a yes.
I'll take that.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Aaron?
Thank you. I had a question and then one other thing. So in the both in 26 and 27 for the spending reductions of the current year and next year, there's $100,000 from out-of-district tuitions. And on the notes, it's projected enrollment savings. I guess my question is, like, what's the basis for those projections and what's the fallback if they don't come through?
Do you want to speak a little bit?
You can start.
Okay, so some of this is on trends and what we're seeing in terms of trends and some savings that we saw this year. But the other is the hope that through the new position and the work that we're going to do with families, that we would see a reduction in those costs. The reality with any of this type of stuff is that whether it's any of these lines, is that some of these lines will exceed what we budget, what we anticipate, and then we'd have to adjust. And it would be the same situation here. I think we're fairly confident that we're confident that we're going to be able to do the work to pull back on these tuitions. This is only a portion, it's a small portion of what we spend overall. And then to answer your question, if that wasn't the case, then we will do what we do, which is we will, in the midst of an operating year, look for other ways in which we can, create efficiencies and find reductions.
The position, the assistant director, the assistant director position for special education is going to be overseeing specifically out-of-district tuition. So basically having a person inside will give us a little more efficiencies than we've had in the past. And I feel not only will it affect who's going out of district, but it's also going to keep track of certain schools that we send kids to. What happens is you usually get a bill for full tuition as far as them being enrolled every day. A lot of these schools, if the student misses a day, they're out sick or what have you, we generally don't get charged. Now we're able to catch that and make it more efficient by having somebody doing this full time. Those are some of the savings we incur. And $50,000 for either the high school or the middle school is, like the superintendent said, it's a very small share of what we're paying right now, but I think it's easily attainable just looking at when we do an internal audit, we look at what we end up coming after them for at the end of the year. I think 50,000 is a very reasonable number.
Is that, Baron, do you have another question on this topic? Or
Not on this topic.
Can I ask just a quick follow-up on that? So on that, it says the out-of-district coordinator, and this is on slide 8, it was grant funded. What grant was that?
So the position right now, which continues through the end of the year, is through the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So it's a special education funds that covered that particular about half of a position.
Okay, and was that position, so do we get to apply that monies?
Yeah, so we've already, unfortunately, it's already built into some of our other assumptions, so we're already assuming that the money that is there will be repurposed and utilized in a different space, and it's already built into some of our other assumptions. So we've already spent it.
Okay, so it's already spent on, so.
Because that goes to, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No.
So we've got a variety of like contracted services that are for kids. If we bring in a specialist who might do some work in the schools, we have a few staff members who are paid for through IDEA funds. So it's a combination of some staffing and some services that are connected to kids through those particular funds.
Okay. So the IDA grant is larger than the half a position here?
Yes, that's just a portion of how we use that grant.
How is this somebody that's in district doing this, or is this somebody that you said we're gonna bring
Yeah.
this in-house? What is that?
So that's it. So right now, this is a person who comes in a few times a month to do some paperwork, does a lot of meetings remotely as part of this. It's a model that we've had. I know when I came to the district, I thought it was an unusual model. It was pitched to me as a way in which we could do this more cost effectively. If we had a full-time staff member connected to it in some way, or had it a duty as a full-time staff member. So now, as the assistant director comes on, one of the things we'll be talking about tomorrow night, that person's half of their job is going to be to do this work, which is going to be to do all the coordination with families connected to the expiration of out-of-district services, maintaining the relationships with students that are already outside of the district, looking for opportunities when they're there to increase efficiencies, whether that is also with an eye towards making sure kids get the services they need. But when we have the ability to refine what's happening on a particular out-of-district site, or be in a spot where it's like, hey, we think actually we're in a position now to be able to bring you back into the district. This person is the point person for that. The other half of their work is connected to a role that's in our strategic plan, which was around coordination of counseling services. And so we've tried to split the role into this person doing oversight of counseling services, nursing services, ELL services, and doing this position and being in-house, knowing our families, knowing our staff, and knowing our programs.
So I guess it wasn't listed, but what is the budget? What's the grant that's funding this at the moment?
Funding which part?
It lists on the budget impact, like how much are we spending on the out-of-district coordinator at the moment? Like
So-
that grant funding
Oh,
position.
that is, I can find it for you. It's 50. I'll have it for you in just a minute, Mr. Mayor. I can pull it
Okay.
up for you.
I guess and we expect to have savings through this because they will be tracking attendance more regularly.
Not exclusively attendance. I think what we're going to see is a lot of what happens with this role is it's around relationship building and building credibility. Just like a lot of people in the city, if you, as a citizen, if you have the opportunity to engage someone who is in your local community, very knowledgeable about the programming and services that are in your community, as opposed to really a consultant who is beaming in from someplace else, I think that builds trust. That trust is the bridge to help families feel comfortable bringing their students back into the school district, and that's hard to quantify. But I think that's really where we're going to see short and long term savings.
Do
Brian,
we see?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Do we see kids returning to the district in other districts where they have this in-house?
Yeah, I think it's more likely when you have somebody who's closely connected to the district. I think in general, I think it is fair to say that it is very challenging when you send a student out of district to have students return, because you've had a conversation at some point with the family and you've said, we don't have the ability to provide what your child needs. And then they go through a process to go out of district, to go to another location, and to then become very comfortable in that spot, and then to turn back around. With families knowing they hear the public dialogue, which is we need to find a way to reduce out of district placements in part to save money, that they're then skeptical of that outreach from the school department when we say, hey, we really think we have the ability to do these things. That's when it's absolutely fundamental that we have somebody that has a relationship with those families, that's been an ongoing relationship, that's credible, that knows the student, that knows the families, that knows the services. I can speak to all of those things effectively in the way that we're very confident the person that we're going to bring on has the ability to do, that we have not been able to do with the way in which we've effectively used the contracted service to try to do it on the cheap.
So I guess I don't know how likely it is to come back, and I appreciate the trust that's involved in order to, you know, get parents to think that it's not about saving the district money. I don't know if those conversations are going to be less in the future, because the district costs are a large line item, and they seem to increase. What is, I guess, harder to get by this is that I don't, without data to support, you know, folks coming back in, it's hard to justify that, like outside of maybe the attendance collecting, there could be savings there, and without the amount that we're spending now, I'm sure that's at the fingertips. But it seems like if half of the job is going to be spent on children that are outside of the district, it seems hard to understand why that money, as it is I see that we're, something that I was supportive of last year, I think it's called the RISE Behavioral Support Position, which was the kids program, I think, rebranded.
That's correct.
Which was, I think, really successful, at least as I recall it. It seems harder to understand how spending the money on another administrator, and I don't know, I haven't had the chance to have a conversation. It's Dan Alexander, who's the director, and he's been in the seat for how long?
We're coming up on the tail end of the first school year.
Okay, so I guess I have like some questions, and would love to understand this more of how, like, bringing in a middle management layer directly in the second year instead of more, I guess, empowerment and engagement of those folks that are directly close to the close to those, you know, in the trust building, as you said, you know, in the classrooms to keep kids, you know, that are and serving them in a budget year where it's very difficult. It seems hard to understand why we're not adding kind of days to those case managers that are really directly already there, and adding another layer when half of that layer is somewhat, I guess, at this point speculative that we're going to be, you know, getting families to return, and a lot of that is which I fully believe that we should have a manager and case manager, but it's hard to see how that's directly impacted to the
I'll have. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead if you guys want to.
Well, I mean, I think there's another side to that too, right? Is I know that getting people, and correct me if I'm wrong in my assumption here, but part of that position, would be trying to get the kids back. But I think new placements, as you know, as the years roll on, the idea is that you now have an ability to look at these kids and say that might have gone out of district are now in district. So I do think that over a long term, that would actually be an advantage to us, because that person now is not just a consultant. They're working in district and thinking about holistically the long-term problems. That was kind of the goal. Is probably wasn't an instant fix for everything, but the idea is to try to over time get more kids, if we can serve them in the district.
I see. I guess I come at not being close, and so would wait to hear like what the data is or supporting it. But it seems like we're coming at it from the same goal of keeping more kids in the district. The idea that is right now, I'm being like reading through it or listening to this. It sounds like there's an administrative problem that's preventing us from doing that. Instead of investing in the case managers that are closer to the children, that's where there might be a disagreement in terms of the philosophical approach to how we're going to solve for that. And, you know, one where I think there is pressures, very strong pressures across, you know, the country, the state, in terms of administrative growth versus growth within money into the directly into the classrooms. Now, could easily be persuaded that this is money that's going into the classrooms because it's so much more supportive, but it's hard to see that right now when we're taking half a grant funded position, and that's half the work. And I guess it's unclear on what the other half of the work is, but wanting to keep as much money as close to the classroom and the children as possible seems like adding a layer between the superintendent, the director of student services, and the case manager is harder to justify from my perspective, but that's not really my remit.
I wonder if I might speak to a couple pieces of that. I guess one thing I want to just sort of clarify with our purpose tonight, that role is already in the budget that the school board passed. So certainly it is the city manager's role next and the council's role next to figure out ultimately what budget you put together for the city. But that, we're making this almost $1 million in cuts separate from that, because we made a strategic decision based on our knowledge of what we need in the schools to include that role. You know, I think you're right. It is sometimes hard to quantify. I mean, we're not making cars. We're helping kids grow. And, you know, I've got kids in the special education system. It is complex. Like, the needs change, you know. They can have good days and good years and bad years. And, you know, certainly the case managers play a really outsized role in a kid's success. There's absolutely no disputing that. I mean, my kid's case manager is a rock star and, you know, really amazing. But, you know, having somebody who can oversee nursing for the kids that have complex medical needs, ELL services to make sure that we're not identifying kids in special education who simply have a language challenge and need more support to learn English, and all of these other pieces, and building trust with those families. I mean, we bring families into the district who come in and nobody at home speaks English, and we have an ELL teacher who's trying to use Google Translate to just bridge basic gaps and make sure that those families have food and know how to get to and from school and know how to use the bus. I mean, it's not as cut and dried as one case manager being able to solve all those pieces. So I guess I would certainly, I mean, Dan can speak to this far more eloquently and intelligently than I can, but I think from my perspective, and I can't speak for the whole board, but I don't see it as a cut and dried answer. You know, what we're trying to do is make a long-term series of investments. And I agree with you. We could always take more case managers. We could always have more counselors. We could always have more behavior therapists. Absolutely. And we have put those in some budgets in the last few years and then had to cut them back due to our budget that we proposed being reduced. So, you know, I think that it's not necessarily an either or, but at this moment to start to do the building blocks to solve the problem, I think that, you know, the board made the decision with the guidance of our leadership team that we wanted to try to make that investment. So I don't know, Dan, you can probably speak better than I can, but.
I guess it's, you know, we keep using the word management, but this is a person who's going to be boots on the ground, working with the schools, being in the schools, working with students. They're going to help develop programming that we don't currently have in Portsmouth. There's a lot behind that we would have to do at the state level in order to get approval for programs within our schools, so we can have students back, we can continue to make deeper programming to keep kids in our community that doesn't exist right now. So if we're going to wait on that, we're going to continue to see that out-of-district budget increase because we don't have the supports, we don't have the needs here, we don't have the programming in Portsmouth to do that. That's why we currently have the large number we currently have when it comes to out-of-district placement costs. And we need to build that, and we need to do that sooner than later, and that's what, you know, the school board wants me tasked with, to work on that stuff. And my job administratively, there's a lot that goes into it on a daily basis. I was in meetings all day today. I was not able to be in schools to see what we need for programming. You know, I have principals behind me trying to talk to me about situations that happen in schools today because of, you know, different student issues that have arisen. So this position really is taking the out-of-district piece, as Zach was saying, getting to know those families, understanding what the needs of those families are, being able to look at the programming we need here in the district or we may be able to offer, and start looking at the options for those students to come back to Portsmouth and really look at what can we do in the future to make it better so that we don't have a student going to district. If we're going to pay $170,000 for a child to go to school, why? And can we do it better here and at a lower cost? And if we use $80,000 to do that because the student needs something more specific to them, and that's something we have to bring into the district, that's much more cost effective than $170,000.
Thank you for that. How many of the out-of-district placements are, I guess, initiated by parents, and how many are initiated by the Portsmouth School Department?
All placements are a team decision, so I can't.
Just like from initiation, there's not data on that?
There's not, because it's always a team decision and determination. If a parent places a child, it's a unilateral placement, and there's a whole different process to go through when it comes to that, and that's usually some court involvement typically, but So initiation at meetings, I couldn't speak to that because I don't know all of our students that are there currently, but it is about, having someone at the table that can talk about what programming we can offer. And a case manager can't do that. They can't authorize payment to have someone come in and, provide this service or that service. So we kind of get into the same cycle of what do we do and how do we support the kids and what services can we provide to them.
And I just wanted to say, in terms of case managers, I think we talked about this with the board in a lot of detail about the fact that case managers are teachers who have a full workload, and then we stipend them to do some administrative tasks. But it's it's $5,000 or so, yeah. So. And but that is to like help set up and run some meetings. That's to do some additional paperwork, but that's not like program creation. They don't have the bandwidth in addition to a full load of direct student services to then also be doing program creation. So our goal is to start to build that capacity.
I think the RISE teacher is a great example of that, right? And that this person will be working directly with that new teacher and what that programming looks like at the middle school to take that lift off of the building administration. Our administrators are expected to do a lot here in this district. I was shocked when I came and there's only principals at the elementary school. I won't even go into that because it's a whole different issue. But, they have a lot of responsibilities, especially at the elementary level. And as big as our middle and high school are, there's a lot that the administration takes on that we need to be able to give back to them and support them better for kids through the student service department. And as Zach said, bringing together our school counseling, our ELL, and our nursing support under that one umbrella is going to be very critical for some of these students and what their needs are. So it's not, I hate to say fractured, but like looked over by different individuals in our district.
What was it, the three things in addition to the out-of-district placement?
ELL, English language learners.
And then out-of-district?
School counseling.
Oh, school counseling,
Yep.
okay.
And then our nursing services.
Now, I don't want to oversell. I think we've been really careful about not overselling what that work's going to look like because those are all huge jobs.
Yep.
We're trying to find efficiencies as we're doing this work. But we talked about this last year when we talked about director of counseling, which was one of the proposals that we did not get funded. Just the need for coordination amongst the folks who are kind of working in pockets. And so this is not going to be as deep a dive as what that was going to be, but this will allow us to do some kind of large scale 30,000 foot planning and coordination amongst those different wings of folks. So those are the things we're trying. I think the whole idea behind this role is to try to create additional capacity in a variety of different aspects of what we do to create additional efficiencies so that we are able to deliver service in a more effective way in the homeschool at a better cost to the taxpayers. But we need somebody on the ground who can be part of that planning work in order to do that. Other folks, case managers not going to be able to do it on their own.
Okay, I think, I don't want to spend the entire, we also have the budget conversation. Would hope that in that conversation that Mr. Alexander, we have a good idea of what what the last year and what you saw as opportunities, decisions of terms of, like a case manager getting a stipend versus, increasing the stipends that they have. You mentioned the RISE program. That was something that was, suggested as before. And what are their low-hanging fruit in terms of programs that we know that, I guess that would be a question that I would love to have an answer to if there's programs that you are not funding right now, like similar to the RISE program that would be funded if we didn't have this, because I guess the concern that I have with if we mention the school counseling, the English as a second language, nursing, and out-of-district placements, those sound like in 2 years we could be talking about, well, we need 3 other department heads that are going to be focusing on simply these, and we're spending more money outside of kids talking about programs that we need instead of actually putting more money to the case managers and allowing them to be better trusted and better engaged in the classroom where they are. That's a concern that I have, and it sounds like if we're doing half of the desks to do these 3 jobs and we're taking something back in, and what was the cost of that grant? Did we get that?
41.6.
So 41.6, And so this position, I'm guessing, is more than $81,000, $82,000?
It is, yes.
So, right there, we're kind of losing, I mean, efficiencies on that, but to understand, like, you know, what we're going to be able to do for half the desk on these three other things, if out-of-district placements are going to be half of the job, like, it's a tall order to have that make sense. And I just want to, you know, be very clear that this is one of the positions that will have a hard time understanding how this is in a time when we are making very strong cuts, that we're bringing in another administrator instead of spending that money on case managers and increasing the amount, especially that those are already, you know, under our
I think you'd find a case manager would be not willing to want to oversee out of district students just because of the cost. And
No,
what is
we have
there.
one, sorry, we have
So-
one in terms, like I guess, like, moving away from the grant-funded model is like what I have, like, without, like, understanding what the initiations are of out-of-district placements. Like, if there's strong data to support that once you leave the district, you are going to be convinced to come back, I guess that's the big question that I have. Like, it seems like the trust is broken down, and regardless of conversations around, like, the finances of it, it seems like a very difficult thing to convince somebody to come back if they've been placed outside of the district. And so spending, like, not half of this new position to be focused on that and making sure that they are getting everything that they need seems like, I just don't know if we're gonna get savings.
So I guess it looks at, from this perspective, when you ask about the initiation, I guess the end result is when a student is placed out of district, it's because the district can't meet their needs, right? So how do we develop programming to better meet those students' needs so that they
Okay,
can stay
that's-
here? So that's the piece that we really need to examine more and look at. And I think that if we take time to do that, our costs are going to grow. We spend a lot of time talking about healthcare here. They're also facing healthcare costs, and those tuition rates are raising exponentially as well.
So, Mr. Alexander, that's exactly the point that I'm saying, like, in terms of the question behind the question of around initiation versus student or teacher-led initiation or department-led initiation versus parent-led initiation. If it's department-led initiation, there's probably an awareness of why we're not meeting those needs, and programming could be asked of those case managers of what we could be doing better to enable those students, and we would need an administrative layer on top of that to understand that. And so if they are department-initiated, you know, all of them being a collaborative effort, but if we know that we're not meeting the needs, like, I would love to hear that from the case managers more directly, meaning you hear that from the case managers more directly, and empowering those case managers either through more money, increased stipends, to spend more time thinking about what could be done differently in this case.
These folks don't have that time. It's just unrealistic.
I feel like we're misunderstanding what the case manager job is. You know, these are classroom teachers who are working often one-on-one with students based on the services that those kids need in their special education plan. So if they identify something that the district can't serve, and it's a small thing expense-wise, or it's easy to facilitate through a contractor, then we might, you know, contract with somebody to bring it in. If it's something that we can meet through the capacity we have, like it's OT or speech or PT, and we have those providers, then the case manager makes those referrals. But I think there's just some kids that need things that we don't do. And we can certainly have that conversation if it turns out that we suddenly have a bubble of kids and we are looking for that. You know, but I'm not sure how a case manager who's in a classroom all day with kids, teaching them.
There's special ed
I
teachers.
mean-
They're teachers. I mean, I think so we have to take out the case manager piece, because that gives
Like, it
gives
says
a perception
manager.
that they're sitting in an office and they're just pushing paperwork. That is a portion of the job they have to do within their prep time when their colleagues are planning for their Algebra 1 class or their ELA class they might be doing. They're doing paperwork. And then if they're a stipend coordinator, they're doing that after school. So their capacity is already beyond what is expected right now. And I think there's a lot that the principals behind me could probably tell you that they spend a lot of time with coordinators talking them off the ledge because they need them in that role, because they are exhausted within the day of what they have to complete. In the role of a special educator, and I'm not going to compare anybody else to any other teacher, but it's huge. There's a lot of responsibility that they have on a daily basis. I was in a meeting this morning that lasted 2 hours. That special educator was in that meeting. Someone else was covering for that person, taking away time that they were should be doing paperwork or something else, because they have to cover for each other to be in that classroom. As did the general ed teacher, don't get me wrong, but it's all a waterfall effect that just continues to happen when you have longer meetings, you have these people there. Then we're going to ask them to say, can you come up with an idea on how we can keep kids from going out of district? The capacity's not there for them, and how do we then expect them to shift their practice? We need you to work with this student and do different things. We have some challenging students in Portsmouth. We have some high level needs that we really need to focus on to keep students here, and we're trying to come up with the best way to do that. So,
Stephen?
Byron was waiting.
Oh, sorry, Byron, you have your comment. Sorry.
I just wanted to say that certainly the school board has considered this very carefully. And in the review of the school budget, we certainly had conversation in the public about whether we should have an administrator, what other special ed steps should we take in order to reduce the out-of-district spending. And it was clearly the feeling of the board that this was a valuable step. That I understand, I hear that you're dubious about that, but it certainly, what you also need to understand is, from the school board's perspective, this was a valuable way to address that out-of-district cost, which is significant. I believe personally, and I'm not going to speak for the board, but I'll just speak for myself personally, I believe that having a leadership position that enables us to get the data that you're asking for is incredibly valuable. I think that having a leadership position that can liaison with people in the community, that's not someone from the outside of the community, is a valuable step. There's always reluctance to pay for leadership positions, but sometimes when you have a significant problem, you do need that leadership, and I think that's why the board listened to the superintendent. That's why the board listened to our head of special ed and said, this is a position worth spending. So I understand we always would rather spend the money in direct service, but on occasion, it is valuable to pay for some leadership.
Steve? Byron?
Yeah, thank you. I was gonna, I had a different comment, but I mean, this has become a larger topic here. So I think Stephen did a great job articulating, but I think from my perspective, the model we have now is not working in terms of curbing out-of-district placements. That's growth, the number of kids that are going into them. I think if we want to attach certain metrics or things we want to see out of this position long-term that we can maybe hold to account, I think that's maybe a good thing we can do. But I think if we continue the current model we have, we are not going to see those changes. We have to make a change. So I think this is an approach I think that our folks have articulated, like the rationale behind it well. I'm not going to relitigate that, but and I think if we want to attach outcomes onto the position, I think that's a fine follow-up. And then what I wanted to take a pass at when I first raised my hand was just, and this is off of this topic a little bit, was one of the slides was what this means for our people, and it was saying, oh, we've secured the health care, jobs protected, genuine partnership, and programs intact. I just wanted to poke a little hole in the programs intact thing. I don't think, 11 and a half over 2 years is really programs intact. I think people who are in the architecture program at the CTE department are feeling like things aren't intact necessarily. So I don't want like the rosy picture of that we have maintained exact services to be like painted truly. So that was my comment.
Byron? Any other? Andrew?
Thank you, Your Honor.
Oh, Beth, did you?
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, Pip, did you have your hand up? Sorry.
I think Steve covered what I was going to say. Thank you.
Just broader, thinking about what Counselor Tabor said. We had 20-year loan, and Nathan, you can correct me if I have this wrong, but the rough numbers, we had 20-year bonds. At 10 years, we're allowed to refinance them for the final 10 years at a more attractive interest rate if such interest rate is available.
Yep.
And that's often the case because of our AAA bond rating, depending on where the markets are. And the reason we have the AAA bond rating, or a significant reason we have the AAA bond rating, is because our general fund, or what's it called, the extra money that we have,
The unassigned fund balance?
yep, is robust. So if we do hit, unexpected expenses, we can cover them without going into a struggle. And that netted us about $400,000, if I recall correctly, this year. And typically that would go into the general fund, and then we'd use it to keep that number at the 13.7 or whatever we need to keep it at. and then anything extra we would use to reduce the tax rate. In this case, we're using it for the school care. We're gonna pass a budget in probably June, that starts July 1st of 26. Do we know the date, because I'm convinced that school care is gonna do another assessment. Do we know the date where the school care board voted for the assessment this year?
August. September? Early September.
How do we ensure that we know in early September if this happens again, so that when we're creating the budgets for the next year, it's not a surprise?
We will not know that, Counselor Bagley. They did not follow their bylaws, written agreements, or any membership agreement. They said to the city of Portsmouth that we were going to end your health care for your teachers, half of our employees, on May 1st, unless you agree to pay an assessment. I would imagine their business practices will not be of the better angels in the future, and we should plan as accordingly as we can with that. And that's an important part of the reason why the decision not to just, I know there was many questions, well, we'll have $5 million in the healthcare stabilization, why is this even an issue? Because we need to extricate ourselves from this situation as quickly as we can. And that will be, the work of the council, the school board, the teachers union, to understand that we are moving mountains at this time to be able to extract as much as we can. If this were to occur in the fall, and we are not in a position to go to another carrier, we will be talking significant layoffs across the district to be able to maintain, or just to be able to pay what those increases are going to be.
And I guess, if we had known in September, we would be in a better position today, and people wouldn't have had to work so hard to,
Unlikely, only because we don't have the ability as other school departments or other cities have in terms of contracts and bargaining powers to be able to replace like for like on that. So it's not an easy thing. They also did it in a time after the assessments are done. So being able to go to market and transition off, you don't typically have that information until April, of this year is when we received it. And so making those decisions, they did that, I believe, and I'm not speaking on behalf of this entire city of Portsmouth, but in a strategic manner so that we would not be able to move to different healthcare providers. And we should remember that as we have conversations going forward on whether or not to remain with them for the remainder of the contract. But it was not a mistake that they did that after the bill in the House failed, or the Senate bill last year failed to allow these assessments to happen. I believe that they did that intentionally, and after our ability to move off at a regular pace, transition from healthcare providers to another.
I agree with you, and that, going back to my earlier point, when we say insurance is going up 29% instead of close to 40%, it makes this insurance look cheaper than the options, when in fact they're very, very close in actual price, if you don't include these imaginary taxpayer bailouts that other companies can't get. And I guess my anger towards school care and the way everything's been handled is well known, and that we're at their mercy, and that's unfortunate.
Agreed. Any other questions on the budget? Just had one. Oh, Councilor Blaylock?
Just one question. Just curious if there was anything else that you looked at cutting that you decided not to, that you decided was necessary.
Well, teaching positions, yeah. So that was the hold off, was to, to avoid those reductions. I mean, we passed, April 1's our notification date for continuing teachers. But there was still, if we had anybody leave the district or do other things, that could have been something that we would try to target. But our desire is to not have any additional, impact on direct services if we can.
One last question on the shift of BA to assistant BA to accounting role. Can you offer a little bit more understanding on the structural notes? It says structural realignment there.
Yeah, I mean, I think Nathan and I can probably talk through this together a little bit.
Yeah.
I think that there's a desire to see over time to what extent, especially as we're moving to ERP across the board, can the school department rely more heavily on city finance for some of our operations? So the conversation was around, I don't know, Axel, you want to talk more from your side on that?
I think one of the things that we've been conscious of is that there's somewhere between a week and a half every month that is spent in reconciling the city's ledger against the schools, or the schools against the cities, however you want to, your perspective. And there are every month 2 people involved in that. There's an accountant on the city side, and there's, in this case, generally the assistant business administrator has been doing that role. And so we collectively spend time reconciling the books back and forth to make sure that they match as we move forward. And as we move to a unified platform with a same chart of accounts, one instance of software rather than 2, we won't have reconciliation like that, because each transaction that's executed all year long will be in the only data set. So collectively, we pick up some capacity where we won't be chasing what's this, where's this. I mean, that happens on both sides, but it doesn't have to happen collectively to match, right? So what we talked about was the fact that a lot of the duties, not necessarily of the business administrator, but of the assistant, who is like a senior accountant working to support the accounting operations of the school department. Those functions generally ought to be able to be picked up by the accounting staff and the finance, and it would allow a savings of a body, because if you're talking about 2 people spending a week to a week and a half, that's tantamount to 3 weeks a month of somebody that we really won't need. So I don't want to get too carried away in the potential savings necessarily, because it remains to be seen what the ERP implementation delivers to us and what it looks like. But we certainly believed that by the time we have fully implemented on the financials, which right now is targeted for 1 January, we ought to be in a position where finance is providing that kind of support to the superintendent and the business administrator, rather than them having to keep their own body for that purpose.
So I guess a more extended question, and this kind of goes to, it's, part of the reasons I'm questioning the assistant student services, what's the actual title?
Assistant Director of
Student Services, is that I believe that role in and of itself is probably many more than that role as it's being described, and all the things. If we're actually going to see savings on that in terms of program creation, it seems like there's a lot in there that can be done that's not just going to be a consolidation. I'm not going to go back to that point, but it makes this point more important for me, is that if there is going to be administrative growth on portions that are distinct and special to the school department, I would love, and I believe that we owe it to the taxpayer, the resident, just efficiency of government in general, that we should be looking at every position that exists in back office. I know that, Brian, you're moving on, and we appreciate what you've done for the city, but would want to know if a business administrator role directly within the school department needs to exist in the same way going forward as the city. If there's not other back office functions, and to understand that directly from, not encroaching on anything from a charter perspective on what is available and what's the bottom line that the school department and the school board absolutely control. But if we're going to see growth in one area, how can we look at consolidation around back office support in another area that can allow us to continue to provide really great, classroom and things that are touching the classroom. And if it's an accounting services, or if it's a DPW services, things that are tangentially related to classrooms, how can we better efficiently deliver those services as a city across multiple different departments? And that's not a question right now, but a thought of, in terms of, as voraciously as you guys defended having another layer in terms of providing better services for our children. I would love for the same sort of intensity and belief that we need to efficiently contract the department in other ways that are going to allow us to spend the necessary money, because we're not going to be able to continue to grow every department at the same rate all the time. We can't have two governments in the city of Portsmouth that are both growing if we have the opportunity to consolidate those.
Yeah, I would just say, I don't want to lose track of the fact that in the proposal we just gave you, we reduced the position in central office to lean on human resources.
Yes.
And reduce the middle management position in I think you would term it as a middle management position in relation to curriculum. And are doing this hybrid to the finance department. I think we've taken 3 significant steps in this proposal to move in the direction you're talking about.
And I appreciate that, and I just implore that it's a celebration as you're describing it as, and not something that is done as a it's something that we should all be focused on, providing the most efficient government as possible all the time, so that we can spend the money directly on the ways, not just to save money for the out-of-district placements, but to deliver better services for the kids, so that we can all look at those, every student getting the curriculum that they absolutely need. And so we agree wholeheartedly on that point. All right, Councilor Cook, or we're going right to public comment? Councilor Cook.
I have one quick question around planning for future capital projects. When we had our joint work session on the CIP budget, we talked about the CTE planning that is going to have to take place. I would assume that is architectural planning, design planning around the future CTE project. That, I'm guessing, is hidden somewhere in, I know that those costs weren't in the CIP budget. Those are hidden somewhere in maintenance budgets. Is there a way to delay some of the architectural planning, design planning on some of those things to help save some money in this coming year's budget, given how far out those projects are?
Do you want to talk about where those?
Yeah, the grants that we get for the CTE, it's a rotation from the state. We have a finite window that we can use for that, or we lose the funding. The funding is pretty substantial. So, yes, we are getting ready for it, but we haven't really expended any funds yet to get there. We're basically doing 30,000-foot planning, how it's going to look if we open the building up, what's best to do.
But we don't anticipate significant, and I'll let Kenny, no significant spending on the planning stages at this point. Not at this point. Not in this upcoming year. Right. Minutes before I walked into this meeting, I was just coming out of CET director interviews, and then I ran over here to come to this. So we're right now in terms of our process, let's get that person on the ground, make sure they're in good shape. But there is not significant planning funds in FY27 that is connected to that particular project.
Thank you. That's why I was asking.
Yep.
I knew that you were hiring a new CTE director and that it would take a while for that new person to think about how to do this, and that maybe that was something we could do.
Yeah, I think there will be planning work that gets done in the upcoming year around needs assessments and things like that, but it's not one where we're bringing in expensive consultants to help with that work in the upcoming fiscal year.
Thank you.
So.
All right, no other questions. We'll go to open up to public comment. Thank you, Petra.
Thank you.
Good evening, Peter Huda, Portsmouth. So for everybody who's not seeing this, what I've just handed out is the meeting minutes from April 1st of the Portsmouth School Board Finance Committee, separate from the regular school board. And I'd like you to go through those and follow along as I ask questions. So before making any decisions tonight, I urge the council to review these meeting minutes. They are also available on the website if you go back to the archive. And these minutes raise several serious concerns that warrant clarification. So the first thing I'd like to call to your attention, if you follow along, is the committee goals and strategy, just standard, regular stuff. The question I have would be on transition planning. I think that was addressed tonight. What I'd like to make sure the council understands is on page 89 of the school budget. You do have a school accountant that was hired 2 years ago that was classified as the business admin, and the salary of that is at $108,000. So the question that was asked by the council is very good, of why do we need that? Why can't we put that towards teaching? So, if you look at what is here, I'm going to just go down the list here of the questions that I would have that we would like some clarification on. So, in summary here, the core problem here is the school board is asked to approve budgets without being given complete, accurate, and compliant financial information. First, on budget transparency, school board members themselves requested a year-over-year delta. This is included under 2 budgetary challenges. I would ask you to notice the first one, highlighted in red, declining enrollment. This is very concerning to me. This tells me that it is known that the enrollment is declining, but the costs are remaining the same or going up. Declining enrollment, concerns were raised that the enrollment declines. The district must be prepared to justify staffing levels that exceed industry best practices. The next one, the Delta report. A request was made for line item comparisons between previous and current year's budgets to highlight significant changes. So this is a matter of transparency. School board members themselves requested this Delta, and what basically this Delta report shows what has changed. This is not optional. This is a fundamental to responsible budgeting and is required under RSA 3254. Yes, that information was not provided when the data was presented, and when it was provided, the data was incorrect. And I can show you where those numbers were. Second thing I'd like to call to your attention, under systems and infrastructure. Second, financial systems. The current process is described as prehistoric. Relying on spreadsheets instead of a fundamental system. At the same time, the district is now moving towards a modern system. This is an administrative responsibility, not a school board failure. The board cannot make informed decisions if the administration is not producing the usable financial data. So I would ask you, if you can't get it out of the systems, does anybody know how to use Excel in the school board or the school administration? Third, and most concerning, number 4, financial compliance and 207 cost center. This is special ed. The 207 account, this account is currently used to fund over 40 full-time equivalent positions using a mix of SAU 50 tuition, state special aid, and federal Medicaid funds. Number 2, in blue, compliance issues. It was identified as non-compliant because it frequently requires transfers from the general operating fund to remain solvent, despite being intended to be self-funding. There is a lack of transparency. These 40 positions are often hidden from the main budget book, masking the number of true employees. I would remind you, this was meeting minutes taken from the attendance, which is on the top, Brian Cisneros, Brian Mato, Steve Adler, Brian French, and Lynn Ross. So, the over 40 positions are funded through this account, which it's not clearly visible in the main budget. It requires transfers from the general fund to stay afloat and has been identified as non-compliant. This means the true staffing level and cost structure are not fully transparent to either the school board or the council. Fourth, on hiring and budget control. The committee acknowledged that hiring decisions need to be better coordinated with finance, yet the positions are being filled before budget approval. Again, that points to a breakdown in administrative controls, not policy direction from the board. And finally, stepping back, the administration is aware of these issues that are documented in this report. Yet, the same budget approach with continued increases is still being presented to the school board and to this council. This is a fundamental concern. The annual budget is not just a document, it's what taxpayers rely on for accurate and complete information. If the underlying data is incomplete, inconsistent, or not transparent, then the decisions based on that data are at risk. Before moving forward with additional taxpayer commitment on any of this, the council should ensure that the school board is receiving complete and accurate data to make their decisions. All staffing costs are fully visible to both the school board and the council. And the school administration is meeting its responsibilities to provide clear, compliant reporting. Thank you. I urge you to review this. This is very important. This is coming out of a finance committee meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Petra. Still not a back and forth, but one of the things, just as a reminder to the council and to the school board, we set the bottom line budget. We do not direct positions, can't direct positions. We can't cut a position. You guys can hire a position at any time that you want because it's not going to a vote of the town. You would then, if you got less money next year, you would have to make do with that, but we do not have the ability to control your spending on a line item basis. It's important to know that, and it's important to reiterate that any cuts that we'd make or any additions to the budget have no control over how that is spent or where that is spent. Just as right now we're asking for monies back in FY26, you are doing so with remaining. Just want to clear and clarify that we do not, as a charter, have the ability outside of buildings over, I think it's 10,000, or there's a bill, it's a building component. We do not have the ability, that goes to a building committee, but we do not have the ability to direct hiring on that, and a point that just needs to be reemphasized.
Esther Kennedy, 41 Pickering Ave. I come before you tonight kind of taken back, to be honest with you. There are categories in the special needs department. You have your case manager / teacher, and then there's a coordinator in the building that gets $5,000 according to the superintendent when I talked to him about a month ago. And then you have your director of student service. When I brought forward last year that we were throwing away our students because of the out-of-district amounts we were given, we were at $5.5 million. And this year, in the budget, and the mayor's right, you can't do line item, but you can take percentages out. We've added $300,000 again for out-of-district. The plan that's being put in place, what I heard tonight, which makes me kind of disillusioned, is that the meetings, the decision has to be made at a meeting. There's not going to be some higher authority to come in and say, you cannot do that plan. That's against state and federal law. The decision is with the case managers, is with the LEAs, is with the parents, is with the classroom teacher.
every IEP meeting, you must have a classroom teacher, an LEA, a case manager, a parent, and if the child's over 14 years of age, the student must be considered. And if they're over 18 years of age, they can run the meeting, basically. So there is these discussion points. We're not going to have an authority figure to come in and say, no, I'm not going to send your child out of district, or else you're going to be sitting at the state in due process or in court. So it goes back to, how do we support our case managers? How do we support our coordinators? And if there's 46,000 in that IDA grant, personally, if I was sitting there, I would say we want to take that money and give it and make the coordinator's position a little bit more functional, so that they who are in the buildings understand the families, understand the kids, understand the parents, can take that leadership role. We are still sending kids out. And one of the reasons we're sending kids out, and what I'm totally frustrated with this budget, is I do not see anything in this budget, and I've gone through it with a fine-tooth comb, that talks about program development. If we're receiving a lot of autistic children that have to go out of district because we can't handle them in our buildings, what are we doing for program development? There's nothing in here to talk about that. And I'm sorry, as a director of student service myself, who runs a school, who doesn't have a coordinator by choice, you are responsible for creating those programs. You are the one working with the state to create those programs. You are the one that are coming up with the concept. You are going to all the other places that have state meetings and learning about different programs and learning about needs. You bring the theories to the school, at which point they get developed. You know, you look at spacing, you look at where those kids might have their specialized programs, so they can stay in their buildings, so they can stay in their homes. That is not in here in this budget. And I get that it's line item that you can't do. But you could ask, where's that 108,000, probably plus with insurances even more, money going? And what I heard is it's going to go to manage out-of-district placements. Well, the bottom line is that person cannot be a sole gatekeeper of your school. It takes that IEP team to be the gatekeeper. The IEP team has to have trust that the school has a program for their students to be in, and their students are going to get educated and taken care of. That's what we need. You don't need middle management. Under the 207 and cost center that Petra shared with you in the meeting minutes, when we were going through this school budget, this was at the bottom of the budget sheets, and we were trying to figure out what it was trying to say. I guess I'm perplexed here that it talks about special education aid, which is money that we do go for at the state a year later. So you give your services to students, you pay for your out of district until July 1st. And then in July, before August 1st, you capture and you quantify and qualify any student that you're paying more. Right now it's about $76,000 a year. You submit all that paperwork to the state, and then the state, almost a year later, not quite, usually around January, but it's been as long as March, will give you potentially 80% back. That is in a different fiscal year. So in our case, it comes in as a revenue, and it is utilized to offset the taxes. Because it's a service you paid. You're not paying up front for that service like the grants, but it's a service you paid. Similar with Medicaid. Medicaid is a service you do, you're paying for, you're going later to get it. You have up to a year to capture that Medicaid money. So I'm really perplexed why we're putting it in the budget that we're using those funds for teachers when they don't come back for almost a year later. So they're in the next fiscal year. And I can't figure out why we're doing that. And then as far as the sending districts, SAU 50s, I guess, you know, usually you take the budget, and I know this plan is pretty similar, and you figure out what your cost is per student, and you bill those people. So how come it's only, there's a problem, and we're questioning 40 positions, how come it's only relied on SAU 50, and how come isn't the general fund for Portsmouth? So all those are questions I just can't get my head around. I don't understand. I don't understand where the budgeting is going here. I question where the money's going and how it's being worked, to the point where I'm wondering, do we take it to the AG? You know, I really think you folks need to ask for an audit. And I know Nate's been there for a while and does a nice job, but you need to look at audit. We weren't even meeting the RSAs this year when we received the budget. We couldn't even look at what the past expenditures were. It's right in the RSAs, folks. You need to do that. And then, you know, in the meeting minutes, we saw the staffing, resources, and allocation. If we truly believe we have access staff, then put some of that money into the coordinators. So I found you $40,000 in IDA funds. And we have this excess staff sitting in the middle school according to the meeting minutes. So you have some money to make not so much upper management, but management in the schools that can help you support people you can educate on sitting at meetings, making appropriate decisions, understanding the process. So I totally believe and understand that you folks cannot do line items. I've sat in your place jumping out of my shoes and trying to figure out how you could do it. You can't. The laws say that. But you can make suggestions. And you can speak up on those suggestions. You can also make it so if we know the position's 140,000, then you take 140,000 out. You have that right, because you can do the bottom line figure for the reason that you want to use it for other sources. But when this was brought to my attention, it just made me question things. And I hope it makes you question things and wondering, where do we go from here? Where have we gone? And, you know, we can't keep throwing away our special needs students. We need to keep them in our community. How are we going to do that? And from what I'm hearing tonight, there's not a plan, because you don't have program development. You don't have any money in here to get a facility ready to program develop. You don't have it. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. I will say that in the conversation that we had around the assistant director of student services, that was one of the remits and the explanation given for the that position to be a program, identify and create program. That's what I believe the chair spoke to, and a number of others. I think there are continue to be significant. There will be, at least I'll have questions on if that's a possibility with taking over the roles of ESL, of nursing, of out of district. And, you know, I do think that understanding the program development role specifically as something that jumped off the page as a way to keep people, keep our children within the district is a valuable and useful exercise. Just want to hear more of that as we come to the final adoption of the budget, of specifically how is adding an administrative layer that could be taking off other positions, if that's in service of creating more programs. We'd just like that to be as clear as possible. You know, I could be convinced that nursing and ESL and out-of-district placements all kind of roll up into that program development, but, you know, there's probably a lot of information on what programs need to be, and if this is a crawl before we run approach, or even walk before we run, walk briskly before we run on that. Some of the concerns I have are just once we expand those roles into other roles, there's a lot that can expand into those as well. I'm not saying it's not needed, but look forward to that conversation. But did want to correct, at least as I understood the conversation, program direction and development was a critical part of what that position set out of trying to achieve. And so want to give that impression to those that are walking, that was my impression of the conversation. All right. Certainly. Sue Palladora, sorry for not seeing you there.
I was hiding. Sue Polidora, Portsmouth, and I also saw that memo that you have been given tonight, and I was pretty shocked to see some of the stuff that is written in it, to the point that I said, this must be an April Fool's joke. Aside of all of the information that the previous speakers have given, I usually stay pretty much on top of the news, national and also state. And the impression that I am getting is that school education is getting a very heightened attention from just about every single town and every SAU in New Hampshire. So that noise is getting louder and louder and louder because people are getting to the point, towns are getting to the point that they can no longer afford the bill that is given for the education of the children. So we're going to have to come and to a place where we have to rethink how we do things. My impression is that we have become too bureaucratic and that we need to start looking inside of the system and involving the community more in the system. We cannot, right now, we cannot afford to just keep going the way we are. What would happen if all of a sudden the schools, the SAU 50 school decided that under the new law, they can actually take their kids to another place other than coming to Portsmouth High? How are we going to absorb that? Now, it could be that kids could maybe taken out. It could be that some kids could be coming in. We don't know yet how this is going to play out. But it's part of what I'm seeing as there is a change that needs to happen in the way that we are providing education that makes sense and the taxpayers can afford. One of the issues that I have with this is like there is no actuals for 2025 in the budget. You have to compare that. Every organization has to have an actual of what happened the year before so they can base their following expenses on that. This is apparently has not been produced by the school board and is in violation of an RSA of the state. So let's not ignore that. This has to happen. So my other point that when I was listening regarding the administrator that is being hired for the special education is yet another layer. And I'm thinking, like Esther said, that team, there's more than just one person making the decision to take that student out of district. It has to be a team. And does this person that is coming in, does he or she has the ability and the experience and the background to create programs that will be able to give an option to the people, the parents and the students in Portsmouth? If he doesn't, then why are we spending the money on hiring someone without that experience? This is just basic stuff. People are looking at this all over the place. A 6% increase, as I've heard it earlier, for the school budget this year is totally out of line. Yes, you saved almost $1 million by this person, this clerk is retiring, that other clerk is retiring. Fine, great. 6% is totally out of line, and it needs to be lined up with what the expenses are and what the taxpayers' requirements are. You can't keep bringing this budget, heightened budgets like this year after year after year, and expect that nobody's gonna complain. There was a time when I used to come to these meetings, school board meetings years ago, and everybody would invariably will say, well, it's for the children. We gotta do it. It's for the children. Okay, great. I love that it's for the children. But we have come to a place, an intersection of benefit to the children and what we can afford. And that intersection is getting louder and louder. It would behoove you to pay attention to it because of your fiduciary responsibilities to the city of Portsmouth and to the taxpayers. This is just my observation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sue. Any other speakers for public comment? None on Zoom? Want to thank everyone again for coming. Again, I know that you guys have a harder meeting tomorrow night in terms of having this conversation. It's a difficult thing, and you see, I think, on social media a lot of times just we continue to see costs per child go up and population of students go down, with no irony that those are related terms. When we lose population in a classroom, it's not like, Mrs. Littmeyer's third grade class moved to Maine. It's 1 or 2 or 3. It's very difficult to see all of those savings. It takes a coordinated effort over a long-term period to reduce when you used to be a growing city that had an air base here, and we had a lot of elementary schools feeding a high school that was a lot more students than it is right now. I think we are in a difficult position to be able to make those cuts and make them meaningfully. I thank you for doing that work, for recognizing that efficiency is a part of the government, that we have to be able to look our taxpayers in the eye and say, yes, we are using your money effectively. But I stand by the fact that the dollars that we spend on the education in the city of Portsmouth come back to us probably more than any other dollar that we spend in the city. And that's where I think that we have a community that believes in education, that has fought for education, is the product of education. And I want to thank you for making these very difficult, hard choices, knowing that when you look at a student, like, I know it's not just my kid that's there. When I look at any student and I realize that the teacher that they have can be the difference of the life that they're going to live or the life that they would have otherwise if not for that intervention of the teacher, it pains me to think that we are not approving every aspect of it. It just goes to the fact that we do not have a system that allows for us to have unlimited funds that goes towards education, and so those decisions are really hard. And they're hard when a lot of the money, as it is this year, goes to things that we do not see as taxpayers. The fact that that we've worked out, spent 2.5 hours figuring out how we're going to make it work for the healthcare to be exactly the same as it was last year sucks. That's a really hard conversation that we are having, to come up with the fact that just to get back to where we were at the beginning of last year, the healthcare that we had bargained for last year, that we're in a position where we have to make a lot of these tough decisions. And so that's where I think a lot of people are frustrated, is that we don't seem to be getting more out of the product that we're putting in, but there's so many pressures that we're facing, and I just want to thank you guys for dealing with them as head-on as you can, and look forward to the vote that you will take tomorrow, and then coming back and having this broader conversation. So again, want to thank you. Because I didn't have the gavel, I talked too much, I didn't pass it to Joe. So with that, just appreciate everybody coming in, and good luck tomorrow night. Thank you.